a different idea, which is going to be even better. So, they typically are. So this morning, we're going to talk about the Feast of Tabernacles, or the Festival of Tabernacles, or Festival of Booths. Sometimes when we read the chapters, we typically read 12 chapters every week, and sometimes it's really easy to pick a topic, and sometimes you could run with that topic for weeks upon weeks. This week was a little more of a challenge. There is a lot of stuff that's thrown to us in these 12 chapters, but how do you really kind of streamline it down to something that you want to speak on and try to get the information and try to hand it off to those that may not have seen it priorly. But I landed this week on the Feast of Tabernacles, or Booths, and we're going to talk about that. But before we get too deep into that, there's a couple other things we got to make sure everybody knows about. So we will be doing our quarterly breakfast in 2 weeks from today. So we come in at 9 o'clock, set up the tables, everybody gets a chance to come in, eat, talk, know each other a little better. So we've had, in the past, we had a wide dry erase board that people would write down what they wanted to bring. We don't have that anymore. So just, if you want to, nobody's obligated to participate in this, nor bring anything. But if you would like, please do so. And we'll have food, drinks, whatever, and we'll have the typical coffee and all of that. So that will be in 2 weeks from today. The other thing is just to kind of give you a heads up. These are what we'll be talking about, something that comes out of these 12 chapters next week. Now, obviously, if you got the little book, the little pamphlet out there in the office, or the little stations, you can pick one up there, or we always post this on our Facebook page, what the readings are for the week, so you can see in advance. And then I tried to give you a little hint throughout the week about what I might be teaching about. And we did that this week as we put up the Festival of the Tabernacle. So, if you see the photo, does anybody here already know really what the Festival of Tabernacle or the Festival of Booths was about? Is anybody already familiar with that? Okay, then this picture's not going to make much sense to you right now, but it should at the end of class. So let's talk about that. And if we really get into the topics, what we see in Leviticus chapter 23, God reveals to Moses 7 holy days, not holy days, but these are times set apart. Now, some of these are week-long festivals, as the Festival of the Tabernacle is. It's a 7-day celebration, but within the course of a year, these 7 specific religious holidays is what we would call them in our aspect of what we think of them as Americans. So, if we think of a religious holiday in America, what comes to mind? Easter, Christmas, Day of Pentecost. Probably not for most people, but I like that one. 4th of July, do you find that to be a religious holiday? No. But really, would we say that the majority of us would agree that probably Easter and Christmas are the two that we, as the United States of America, have set apart as a religious holiday? By and large, I think we would agree. Within the Jewish sector, these are the things that were identified as special times that were set across during the course of the year, really as a specific time to note these things. So, again, these are found in Leviticus chapter 23. And you can see the Festival of Tabernacles that we're going to talk about this week is listed in there as one of those things. Now, in Deuteronomy 16, it does not list all 7 of those festivals. Instead, it only lists these 3. The Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of the Weeks, or Pentecost, and the Feast of Tabernacle, or Booths. Depends on your translations what it's going to be called. Now, in the past 3 years, we have talked about the first 2. But we have not discussed the Feast of Tabernacles at all, mainly because I had no idea what it was. So I thought, okay, you've taught on the other 2 in the past. It's time to know what this one is about. So that's what we're going to look at this morning, is more specifically this. What is unique about the 3 that is mentioned here in Deuteronomy 16 is revealed to us in verse 16. It says, all of your males are to appear So, of those 7 festivals that we mentioned earlier, 3 of them are non-negotiable. You can't bow out. And with these 3 festivals, all males were required to attend. You couldn't take a pass on these. You were obligated to be actively participating in these. And when it talks here, there's no one to appear empty-handed. God required a sacrifice, but he did not require a sacrifice above your means. You will find that noted, that it always, what were you able to? And that meant that if your financial status was lower, you were not required to provide the same sacrifice as someone in a higher income bracket than you. On the flip side, if you had money, you better not bring in a dove or some bird to sacrifice. Why? Because you're shortchanging God. Now, there's other talks in this about tithes and offerings and how it could correlate. But if we're honest with ourselves, has there been a time that we've shortchanged God? And I don't necessarily only mean financially. I mean with our commitment to him, our walk with him, our ministry that he has provided us. We've got certain gifts that each and every one of us has been given. What do you do with it? I had an aunt that passed away a couple of years ago. And when we went to her funeral service, I got to see some of the reports of how she had impacted lives. Now, my aunt was never on a platform. She never sang a special in the church. She never did anything that most people would qualify as ministry. But what she would do when someone was a new mother or a funeral, she would be delivering meals to that family. But one of the things she did most honorably is there was an individual that lived in her subdivision or her area. And in the evenings, she would just walk with this gentleman. And during that time, she would take time to minister, to witness to him. See, her congregation wasn't 100 people. Her congregation wasn't 1,000 people. Her congregation was one person. And she took full advantage of it. There is no mega church pastor that is more relevant than what my aunt did with that one individual. You have a calling on your life. You have people that you can witness and minister to that no one else will have that impact on their life. You have a story to tell. Share it with others. That has nothing to do with what I'm going to talk about today. Let's get back to what we do want to talk about. That was a preview. There you go. Deuteronomy 16 again, it focuses on these 3. It is really all that is, even though Leviticus 23 showed us the 7, Deuteronomy 16, he's talking about just 3 festivals. And it's the commitment that these are a requirement of all of the native born, that they participate in these. So let's take a look at what this is. As we saw in that first preview, the summary of Leviticus 23, the Feast of Tabernacles or Booths, as it is sometimes called in every translation, is the 7th and final feast of the Lord, and took place 5 days after the Day of Atonement. Those of you that may have been here 3 or 4 weeks ago, we talked about the Day of Atonement. This festival took place 5 days after that fact. Here in Deuteronomy 16, it continues to tell us specifically about the Festival of Booths. You are to celebrate the Festival of Booths or Tabernacles for 7 days. And you have gathered in everything from your threshing floor and winepress. Rejoice during your festival, you, your son, your daughter, and your male and female slave, as well as the Levite, the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow within your gates. So this was also a time that was set apart that no work should be done. And every evening they're presenting a fire offering. And it's this time. But here's what I want to do. I want to take some time this morning and define the word tabernacle. Because for me, a lot of times when I think of tabernacle, we think of the tabernacle in the wilderness where they would do all of their worship, where all of the religious activities, let's say, were happening. Is that similar to what some of you think of when you hear the word tabernacle? That's what I relate it to. Every time when we hear tabernacle, I think of it solely in the fact that this is where the priest and all of the religious activities of that time were centered on. But that's not truly, it is the case, but let's look at the word tabernacle. The actual word tabernacle originates from a Latin word. What is that one? And that word means a tent or hut. So when you're looking at tabernacle or booth, essentially what you're talking about is a tent or a hut. That's why we've got the little illustrations at the bottom of the screen, trying to do my best Vanna White for you here. But really, I kind of want to dumb it down here, because what is the purpose of a tent or a hut or a structure of this nature? It's a dwelling place. Now, it's not, in our minds, it's not necessarily a permanent residence. It's something that you do for a short time. But, in fact, you defined it perfectly. It is, in fact, a dwelling place. And that's really what we want to dive into as we continue to watch the story unfold. Let's go back to Leviticus 23, because it actually gives us more information than we see here in Deuteronomy. Have you noticed over the last few weeks, if you want to understand a story, you can't get really singularly focused on one book or one chapter to give you the whole story. Are you seeing that there's bits and pieces in other areas that you've got to kind of collect in so that you have a broader and truer understanding of really what it's about? So let's go back to Leviticus 23 and look at what's said here. And this is referring to what should take place during that festival or Feast of Booths or Tabernacles. On the first day, you were to take the product of the majestic trees, palm fronds, boughs of leafy trees, and willows of the brook, and rejoice before the God for 7 days. You were to celebrate it as a festival to the Lord, 7 days each year. You notice that God doesn't expect church to be a solemn event. He's saying celebrate, have a party. You know, sometimes the church has become really the boring group, right? Is that not how the church has been viewed? Sometimes we can become so uptight and so restricted. But if you look at God, God is almost celebrate what you've been given. And that's really what church should be about. A celebration of your freedom from the sin that held you bound. Amen. To celebrate the past that restricted you and held you back, and now you've been released. But when we get to church, is it often a celebration or is it an obligation? How do we view it as people, as the congregation sometimes? Sometimes we feel, I'm just required to go because it's Sunday again, and people will be looking for me, and if I'm not there, someone might call me or text me, and I'm going to do it for them. And we do it more of a box check. Hey, I did my duty for the week. I'm good. But God is saying, celebrate. Understand this. It says, this is a permanent statute for you throughout your generations. You must celebrate it in the 7th month. What does it mean? So permanent statute for you throughout your generations. What is God getting at? Why do we celebrate the holidays we mentioned earlier? What are they intended to do to the current generation? Remind us. And that's really, if you look throughout the Old Testament, God was saying, hey, you're going to get to a point where the generation that's alive will not have had that experience. And yes, we tell stories and we tell things of that nature to pass on the histories, but a holiday or these types of events were set apart specifically with the intent that when it's done, it is to remind those that have not experienced it to call and back to what it was like. Now, we're here about to celebrate 250 years of freedom within this country. Do we truly understand the magnitude of what that means? Do we have any idea what our forefathers fought 250 years ago to give you freedom from tyranny? Or do we just think of it, it's another day to shoot off fireworks and have a barbecue? It is. And that's when I think of this as myself, this is how I've viewed it so often. It's like, hey, it's just a fun day. We'll maybe do some swimming. We'll maybe do this. We think about what's in it for us, but do we often think back to, what did people have to go through to get me where I am today? As Americans, we should look at 250 years that someone paid the price so long ago. People had to stand up in the face of opposition. And they had the bravery and the courage to do it, to liberate you. Understand that you are the byproduct of what that person did. Now turn that into the religious aspect. You need to do the same thing in your life to prepare your following generations spiritually for the freedom that they have. Amen. Are you going to be the forefather to the generations 3 or 4 down the stream? Or are you just going to say, that's for somebody else to do? No. There had to be men and women that stood up and said, I cannot allow my offspring to have to endure what I'm going through now. I am going to be the one that stands in the gap. And that's what it is. Again, it's a reminder to us today in this year to look at these things. Now, I think a lot of times we do think Easter specifically is really a time, and we talked about this a few weeks ago, and we saw the correlation between Easter and the Day of Atonement for the Jewish versus the Christian aspect of it. Easter is a time truly, I think, that we do. But when you get to Christmas, what has America done to the Christmas holiday? So, yeah, it's about the almighty dollar. And all of these things. And yes, Jesus' birth is an aspect of it, but it's more of a afterthought or a side dish to the main course of what we've allowed Christmas to become in the United States. Agree? Disagree? And the only people that can change that is what you do within your household. You can make Jesus a centerpiece, or you can make Jesus' birth a side dish. What are you going to do with it? Wow, there's a lot going on that I'm not planning for. So let's continue to talk about this, because here's one thing. If you look at the context of just this, and this is why I wanted to highlight this, he's telling them on the very first day they're supposed to take the palm fronds, the leafy trees, and the willows of the brook. But what are they going to do with it? Did you ask yourself that question when you read? Well, you didn't read this. But what do you think they're going to do with that stuff? Burnt offering, that's wave them. Well, let's look at what the scripture said. Now, so again, the scripture does not necessarily tell us this directly, but those things that they just gathered are actually going to be materials that they're going to use. You are to live in the booths for 7 days. So that material they just gathered up on day 1, they're actually going to make a structure in which to dwell for these 7 days. What's that?
They're going to build a tabernacle?
They're going to build a tabernacle, a tent, a hut, out of that. And the requirement is they are going to live within it for 7 days during this festival. All of the native born of Israel must live in these booths or tents that they've made from the material they just gathered, so that your generations may know that I made the Israelites live in booths or tents when I brought them out of Egypt, the land of Egypt. I am Yahweh your God. So imagine this. You're taking your sons or your grandsons and you're part of this festival and you've gathered the material. Now you've made this structure and your kid's sitting there beside you and he goes, Grandpa, why are you doing this? Grandpa, what's your answer? Well, let me tell you something. We were captives in Egypt, and our God delivered us. Yahweh delivered us. That's the thing that we as individuals need to understand. Whose responsibility is it to teach your children about God? Ours. We want to pass it off to the church. We want to say it's the children's church pastor's responsibility. We want to say it's the youth pastor's responsibility. But Moses tells us in his writings that he tells us as you go along your walks, as you take, he's telling you as you live your life, you need to be sharing the stories with your sons and your grandsons and your daughters and your granddaughters. It is your responsibility to pass the story off to them. Don't leave it to somebody else. God has called us all to minister within our families. That's your responsibility. And I told this in here years in the past. There was a time in my life when Abigail was a little girl, and we were going to church in Cuba, and I was just being me. And Amy's like, hey, you need to do this. I'm like, no, that's the children's church pastor's responsibility. I'm teaching to myself this morning. I'm not necessarily teaching to you, but I'm teaching to where I knew I was at that time. And I shirked my responsibility and said, no, it's all on them. They own it. And my wife, she's pretty hardcore on me sometimes. She got on me. You're laughing, but you know what it's like. So. But men and women here today, what do you do with those opportunities? It could be out in a fishing boat. That's what Pastor was talking about that's how he ministered to John Sells. That's how he witnessed to John Sells. We think we have to have some special meeting set up or something like that. No. It's a casual conversation where you share your testimony to another. And hopefully that grabs their hearts. All of the native born of Israel must live in these booths for 7 days. And why? So that your generations may know that I made the Israelites live in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am Yahweh their God. So again, we talked about this is for the future to know the past. Does the future need to know the past failures and successes? Yeah. We talked about this in the past. A lot of times we want to forego, when we were talking about Og last week, sometimes we don't want to tell all the stories because, hey, there's going to be bad days. Just because you're a Christian, you don't get a free pass on everything that comes your way. Matter of fact, you're probably going to face even more opposition. Yes. Yeah. But as we saw in the story of Og, when the Israelites said, we can't go into the promised land because they're big and they've got fortified cities, well, guess what? When they went against Og anyway, they still had to go against big men. Og was at least 12 feet tall. We looked at his bed, was 13 and a half feet tall. He was at least, we looked at Goliath was 9 feet, 9 inches tall. Og's bed is 13 and a half feet long. He's got to be at least 11 feet tall. He's bigger than that. And what held the Israelites back from receiving their promise, they still had to do anyway. But they did it without receiving the promise. Life is not going to be easy on us, but your generations have to know that when it gets tough, your God is still there to pull you out. Yeah. He is not going to abandon you. It's not going to look good and great every day. No. You're going to have bad days. You're going to have bad seasons. It's how you respond to those seasons of life that just looks like everything has turned against you. But when everything turns against you, who do you turn to? God. That's got to be your answer. That's got to be the solution for all of us. I got to get going. I got more to talk about. Here's where it takes us a 180 here. And I want to look at you. You will probably be familiar with this. I'm going to take us all the way to the Gospel of John. John is writing here, and let's understand, because you're going to see this. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. Who is he talking about? Who is the Word? Jesus. So let's change Word to Jesus. And Jesus was God. He was with God in the beginning. All things were created through him, Jesus. And apart from him, Jesus, not one thing was created that hasn't been created. Life was in Jesus. And that life was the light of men. That light shines in the darkness, yet the darkness did not overcome it. There was a man named John, we're talking about John the Baptist now, who was sent from God. He came as a witness to testify about the light, so that all might believe through him. John was not the light, but John came to testify about the light. The true light who gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He's saying, John, this story is about Jesus. Jesus was in the world, and the world was created through Jesus, yet the world did not recognize Jesus. Jesus came to his own, and Jesus' own people did not receive him. But to all who did receive Jesus, he gave them the right to be children of God, to those who believe in his name, who were born not of blood, or of the will of the flesh, but of the will of man, but of God. Listen to this. This is where, watch this turn of events here. Look at this. In the first translation, this is the whole Christian Standard Bible. It says, the Word, or Jesus, became flesh and took up residence among us. We observed his glory and the glory of the one and only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. The King James Version says it this way, and the Word Jesus was made flesh and dwelt among us. But here's what I want to look at. When John is writing this text, he uses a word, and that word specifically, where this version is translated as residence and this one is dwelt, the word actually is referencing to dwelt in a tent. It means to tabernacle. Jesus took up housing with us as mankind. Jesus decided, I will dwell with my people. And here's what we know, that the word that John used when he says that Jesus came and took up flesh and lived within his people is only used in two other contexts. That word, the first one being found in John chapter 7. And we looked at this story back last year. It says, after this, Jesus traveled in Galilee since he did not want to travel in Judea because the Jews were trying to kill him. Right here, the Jewish festival of Tabernacles was near. So he's actually, the word John is using there in John 1 is the same word he's using here in John chapter 7 to identify the festival of Tabernacles was near. So Jesus' brother said to him, leave here and go to Judea so your disciples can see your works that you are doing. For no one does anything in secret while he's seeking public recognition. If you do these things, show yourself to the world, for not even his brothers believed in him. We talked about this last year. Jesus' own brothers, James, Jude, and the other two, they didn't believe Jesus was who Jesus said he was. And they're doing these things. Let me take you back to the other time that this singular word is used. It's back in Exodus. And he's saying this, the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Again, there's that word that John used. Moses was unable to enter the tent of meeting because the cloud rested on it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Understand, the house was so full of God's presence, Moses couldn't get into it. And this is the same word that John uses when Jesus takes up flesh and is born in a manger. He dwelled with us, and yet we were so ignorant to his presence that we just forego him. Israelites set out whenever the cloud was taken up from the tabernacle throughout all the stages of their journey. If the cloud was not taken up, they did not set. And we understand this, but understand that tabernacle. So now I want to flip to another time. See, Jesus decided to tabernacle, to tent, to dwell with us. Jesus chose to dwell with us and walk in the steps of man. But look here in Revelation chapter 21. How do we go from Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy to now we're in Revelation? When I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea no longer existed, I also saw the holy city, a new Jerusalem. So when it talked there in Deuteronomy, it always talked about the city that God chose. They would need to travel to there. Where was the city that God chose that they would travel to? In the Old Testament? Was it not Jerusalem? And understand here in Revelation, it's talking about, I also saw the holy city, a new Jerusalem, coming down out of the heaven from God, prepared like a bride, adorned for her husband. Then I heard a loud voice from the throne. Look, God's dwelling is with humanity, and he will live with them. We've always had the context that God is off somewhere else, in some celestial location maybe. Maybe that's the story you've been fed. But when you get to Revelation, God is no longer separate from his creation, separate from you and I. But he steps down and he inhabits the new Jerusalem. Because he's going to dwell there. And he's going to live with you and I. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and no more sea. And I, John, saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared for us as a bride, adorned for her husband. And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God, the tent, the dwelling of God, is with men, and he will dwell with them. And they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them, and be their God. Lastly, I want to look at it through the Darby translation of 1890. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the seas existed no more. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. God prepared a bride and adorned her husband. And I heard a loud voice out of the heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he shall tabernacle with them. He shall dwell. Understand this. Jesus came at one time to dwell and to live with among us. And during that time, the majority of the people shunned him, would not accept him, even his own family. If you look at that, there's another story in there where they actually took Jesus' brothers, forcefully removed Jesus because he was in a group, and it said the room was so full of people that they couldn't even eat. And his brothers went in and they took him out. And why does it say they took him out? What were they saying as they drug Jesus out of the house? He's crazy. He's out of his mind. He doesn't know what he's talking about. This is Jesus' own brothers did this to him. Jesus' own brothers were ashamed of him. Because we can't be seen in public because everybody knows those guys are Jesus' brothers. Don't hang out with him. This is why James and Jude, if you look at when we talk about it, when Jesus died on the cross, who was there? It was mom and an aunt and a few other ladies. But where were these four brothers? They weren't tabernacling with Jesus. They weren't dwelling with Jesus. They were ashamed and they shunned Jesus. They did everything they could to separate their acquaintance. Probably if they met somebody, they didn't want to admit who their brother was. Do you receive Jesus, or are you ashamed of Jesus? Do you choose to follow and believe in the one that came as a baby in a manger and took up flesh and became the ultimate sacrifice for you and I, and will one day return again? Because why? He wants to dwell with us. Now, how do we not tell that story to our children? I mean, my daughter's here. I was not the best father when it came to teaching the Bible story, was I? I mean, I'm being honest today. I know it's a challenge, men and women, because I've done the same thing, and I've said it's not my job. But if I look at the scripture, everything says it is our responsibility. Are we taking full advantage of the opportunities that we have? Talisha, I know Jake has talked about it with his older children. He was not a follower of Christ. And he lived so much intentionally different with Parker and Chance than he did with the older children. Why? Because he knows he's got a role to play in developing his own children. Men, how many of you in the room have children? Let me see it. Men. Right now. All right. Okay. It's a little over half of us women. How many of you have children? Are we fulfilling our roles and responsibilities when it comes to educating our children? It's a simple conversation, but again, imagine you're taking your sons, your young, in this case, when they went to the festival of tents or booths or meat or tabernacles, whatever you want to call it. Mike, you got two young boys. When they were young men, did you pour into them the word?
Every night, get them laying down, had a comic book Bible. I'd read it to them, I'd put them in the story, all their names that I'd read right off. Time I got them raised, that Bible was falling apart. You know, Zach was his pastor for 9 years, Zach was doing awesome with his kids. One day I
whose souls do we as parents have the most opportunity to impact and influence? Our children. But, you know, that's a takeaway. Another takeaway here is, what do we do with the opportunities that we have? When we have, you know, they had 7 holidays here in the Jewish calendar. We have Easter and Christmas. Think about this in the Christmas season ahead. We've got 7 months to prepare for it. Is there something you want to do different with this upcoming holiday season to call the attention back to Christ? Cody, you got 3 little ones, and I know you and Shaylin Ford, and you're actively in the ministry. But the ministry doesn't only take place within this building. Ministry starts at home. And again, probably one of the biggest failures in the room at doing this guy right here. And I want that to be known. I'm not saying this is an easy road to take. If it was, everybody did it. Any closing thoughts this morning? Did you get anything out of it? All right, I hope so. Sometimes when you get to subjects, you're like, oh, that's going to be hard to make interesting. I hope I brought something to light that you hadn't seen before. And more importantly, you can put it into practice in your own life. And that's really what we need to develop our Christian testimony and walk. And do it every day that we have the opportunity. Thanks all for being here. I hope to see you back next week again. Breakfast in 2 weeks from today. Thanks all.